fully debunked in this case by several of the amicus groups and, of course, by myself in the briefing we did for Rodney. And I think that, collectively, we were successful in educating the justices about the evidence that, contradicts these wild assertions and that demonstrates the therapeutic and palliative benefits that the medicines of the plant offer to so many people.
The Arizona state legislature, which never agrees on anything, voted almost unanimously to pass a hemp bill. And it was vetoed by Governor Ducey. And I found it astonishing that he would veto anything that had that much consensus because the parties are so divided, especially in the state. So it was really interesting, and it was really quite heartening. They're finally opening up that market here because hemp has been used throughout history for everything. And, oil changed the face of our earth, literally. And had it not been for the discovery of, that black gold in the ground, hemp would have been our main resource for everything from biofuel to plastics and composites. So,
you're absolutely right, Snowden. Most people don't know this, but Henry Ford wanted his vehicles to operate off of hemp-derived biodiesels. He lost the argument because the pressures of the oil industrialists were too great. But contemplate what geopolitics would look like today had Henry Ford won that argument. You
right.
wouldn't have even a fraction of the miasma that is the Middle East, and also we probably wouldn't even have the phrase climate change in popular vocabulary.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
Critical and massive.
Yeah, it's really sad. And also, if it hadn't been for the petrochemical industry or for Anslinger or for Randolph Hearst, who had these forests that he wanted to chop down in the Carolinas. And his good friend DuPont had the chemical to mulch it into paper, and he wouldn't have to pay the hemp farmers anymore. It's quite sad.
Oh, yeah. And hat tip to that as well is the deep racism that is behind the anti-cannabis movement. You talk about Hearst's forests in the Carolinas. Never mind those. He had massive timber holdings in Mexico, and they were seized by the Mexican government, which in turn set Hearst loose on the United States with a wave of propaganda in his newspapers that was anti-Mexican.
Wow.
And associated cannabis with Mexicans. And this is, in fact, where the popular word marijuana comes from. Most folks don't realize it's a slang word. It's a negative word. It's a derogatory word. Yeah. And it got propagandized courtesy of Hearst, which in part is why, we mentioned the Arizona Cannabis Bar Association earlier. I'm one of the founding directors. We intentionally chose to call it the Cannabis Bar Association, not the Marijuana Bar Association, because we wanted to take the word back. We didn't want to use the slang, derogatory, racist-laden word in this new age of enlightenment.
What he said.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I consider myself pretty well read on cannabis history and all things cannabis. I'm obsessed with it, actually. And I have to say thank you so much. You just educated me on something that I did not realize, and a light bulb went off. I've covered the Reefer Madness campaign ad nauseum on this show. I talk about it a lot because you're right. It started the racism, but I had no idea why they were targeting the Mexican farm workers. And to know that he actually had it in for the government. Wow, that makes sense. So thank you for sharing that. It's rare that I can learn something like that. That's so profound. So, wow.
I'm not just the president of the Cannabis Bar Association. I'm also a client.
Well, there you go. That's really fascinating. I'm going to look into that more.
Yeah.
And then bringing it back to the racism, 4 times more people of color are arrested and incarcerated than, the same number of Caucasian people who are users of cannabis. And so the racism is so blatant and obvious in the way that it's impacted our criminal justice system and everything else. And when we were talking about Rodney Jones in the beginning, that was running through my head because I wonder if the same thing would have happened to him had he been a Caucasian college
white boy.
Yeah, with parents who worked in the Yavapai County prosecutor's office. And I hate to make light of it.
I suppose when you do your Sheila Polk interview, you might pose that question to her.
I have a funny feeling that she would never agree to be interviewed by me. Although you never know. Maybe she'll have a change of heart one day and perhaps one of the cannabis producers donates to her campaign and she'll come on my show and explain why she's changed her tune. I don't know. It's just all things are possible in this industry.
If it would make her more comfortable, Rob and I are willing to go on with her if she needs company to feel comfortable.
If I ever do invite her for an interview, I will certainly let her know. But in all seriousness, though, I believe in my heart that racism did play a role in the Rodney Jones case, although maybe not overtly. And like I said in the beginning, what he's been through, I just can't even imagine. I mean, an otherwise law-abiding citizen who spent the money to get his medical marijuana card and went to a dispensary and instead of going on the street to buy the concentrates and hashish that he had on his possession at the time. It's so unjust what happened to him. And I'm really heartened to know that the Supreme Court actually ruled in his favor, but this is just, and like you were saying too, the impact on the industry would have been just so devastating. Let me ask you this, Gary.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, with the industry being so dependent on the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, right? When a ruling like this came in and almost none of the dispensaries took all of their concentrates off the shelf, was there a legal reason that it was okay for them not to do that? Or was everybody just risking that if they all act en masse, that they're not all going to be arrested at once?
That is a great question, and I get asked that one a lot. The short answer is the Court of Appeals' decision at that time and all the way through Tuesday until the Supreme Court said otherwise. That decision was law of the land for Arizona, meaning that no patient, no agent, no dispensary could use, possess, consume, manufacture, or sell extracts, period, no qualifiers. So there was no law or color of law, to my knowledge, that would have permitted the dispensaries to stay the course by manufacturing and selling those products. So why did they do it? I think it was 50%. They had a strong good faith belief that this would eventually correct itself at the Supreme Court. And it was 50% incredibly high risk tolerant people. But, none of it was legally sanctioned. They just assumed a risk, and they were very fortunate that it worked out. And as a lawyer who has dispensaries as clients, as well as other industry participants, I can tell you I was having a small ulcer over the problem over the last year. So the manufacturer of Tums and Rolaids made a lot of money off of me while I worried about this.
But all lawyers have Tums and Rolaids at their side, so that's not that unusual. We just live with that.
Yeah.
But I mean, as I mentioned before, this was a nerve-wracking year for lots of different constituencies.
Yeah.
As a result of that decision. But we should be grateful that the system was able to correct itself so quickly. The oral argument was less than a year after that decision came down, and the decision from the Supreme Court was less than a year. That's pretty quick justice in today's judicial system. That's a quick turnaround. And so I think we're all very fortunate.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out, we got a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court. There wasn't a single justice who disagreed.
That's right.
That's actually pretty impressive that it was unanimous. And, this reminds me also around a little bit after that appellate court decision came out was when the FDA started making noises about the fact that CBD had been signed a numerical code in Schedule 1 the year before. It obviously was a coincidence because they have nothing to do with this, but in California, the Department of Health and Human Services actually banned hemp CBD as a food additive because of the noises being made by the FDA. And I found that really interesting, that the timing of that appellate court decision sort of empowered or emboldened the FDA to jump on their new authority under the Farm Act, which was passed at the end of 2018, legalizing hemp nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly there was this letter. So now, in a similar situation, almost everyone is still selling their CBD throughout the country. A lot of people can get it online, and a lot of people can get it mailed from state to state. And yet the FDA has stated in no uncertain terms that they're operating illegally, that the transfer of any hemp-derived CBD between states is a violation of federal law. And we're hoping that the States Act or one of the other pieces of legislation at the federal level will kind of correct this, because, I mean, seriously, I can understand them not approving of labeling claims. And I mean, people who sell vitamin C go through the same thing. But if they're really concerned about the molecule CBD because of the approval of a drug that contains CBD, then they should also remove echinacea and chocolate from the shelves of every grocery store, because they contain the molecule CBD as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's complicated as hell, Snowden, and you have correctly identified the second source of my ulcer.
Thank you.
Yeah, this whole CBD question mark is the next undiscovered country in this crazy world we call marijuana land. And you're right, the Farm Bill from 2018 gave us nationally legal hemp, but in turn didn't solve any of the CBD questions. That's going to have to rest in part with the FDA and in part with Congress. If Congress doesn't enact any new laws to address this at all, it's definitely going to fall to the Food and Drug Administration's regulatory oversight and control. The FDA has already made it crystal clear, because they've issued written letters to this effect, that if you're making any sort of health claim or infusing CBD into any edible product, be it for human or animals, you're absolutely subject to FDA oversight and approval. And that is going to be an ongoing problem. Now, some folks are responding to this by just selling CBD isolate and not saying anything about it other than this is a bottle of CBD isolate. That might be the temporary solution, but it's not a long-term solution.
Yeah, and I also happen to know of one specific raid on a general store that happened to sell CBD-infused pet treats, and they had some candy bars. There were no claims on the label. They raided it. They took all the pet food and they took all of the chocolate bars and left the store owner going, but wait, I just paid for all of that.
Yeah, if they had not put it inside of food products, they might possibly have avoided that moment. And for the sake of your listeners, because I know people get emotionally very polarized about the question of these products, we all have to remember there was a point in U.S. history where there were no regulations whatsoever. And these are the days of the proverbial snake oil salesman selling what was mostly alcohol in mislabeled bottles off of the back of a wagon to a group of townsfolk who would just wander over and listen to this guy spew his lies and take their money. And oftentimes the products that people purchased either didn't do what they claimed to do, or worse, were toxic and lethal. So I don't suspect anybody wants to go back to that time. It was a miserable time to live in. And, like when people talk about, make America great again, and they want to go back in history. I mean, you want to go back to that? Have at it, buddy. Leave everybody else here where we are. So to that extent, yeah, I know we all have a warm, fuzzy spot in our hearts for anything cannabis, but we do have to acknowledge that it does definitely fall within this same group of things that people consume and affects their bodies. And I think that there's probably a reasonable balance point between safe regulation that mandates things like manufacturers not lie about